Now, to hear you say just that list of influences, it instantly sounds like a description of what we all think of as the Tony Kushner style, or of your voice as a playwright. But at Columbia, you're still not a theater major. You end up a few years later at NYU getting an MFA, but in directing, not in playwriting. Did you know that you were destined to be a playwright? Did you plan to make your significant contribution as a theater director? And what went wrong, or right, I guess, however you want to look at it?
I think I always wanted to be a writer. My father, as I said, is a great lover, especially of poetry. And so I had, and he's a wonderful guy, but very severe about what's good and what isn't good. And he doesn't think of art as therapy. It's like you can do it or you can't do it. And, it's a musician's. I mean, if you can play the clarinet or you can't play the clarinet. It's like there's no argument about it. If you can't, you may not be Stanley Drucker, but if you can't play the clarinet, you're not going to get a job in the orchestra. So it's like fairly simple for him. So if you're going to write poetry, you should be Keats or don't bother.
That's quite a standard.
Yeah, that's not really fair, because there are poets who are not as great. I mean, like pretty much everybody other than Keats is not as great as Keats. So, but you have to be, he had very, very high standards and absolutely no interest at all in mediocre. In fact, he can't read mediocre writing. I won't say which book it was, but I just gave him a book that's actually a very good book that got a lot of acclaim about a subject that's near and dear to his heart, and he read about 10 pages of it and abandoned it, because if it's not really good writing, and he has an incredible ear for it, it's just not of interest to him. He can't find his way into it. So I had that sort of hanging over my head, and writing is scary, and I didn't want to be a writer if I couldn't make a living as a writer, and that seemed very unlikely. And I just didn't think I was going to be good enough to do it. So directing seemed, stupidly, I thought, oh, directing's easier, because, it
has to be easier than writing a play, I'm certain of that.
Except it isn't, it actually turns out. It's really not. I recently forced myself to direct again for the first time in 17 years, because I'm so awful with directors, and I make them go through such hell. And I thought, I should really stop showering everybody I work with fury. I mean, I'm not the only playwright who does this, but you sort of, because you give your play to this person who's going to, more than anybody else, has control over what's going to actually happen, to the extent that anyone has control. This person at least seems to be responsible for all the terrible things that are being done to your play. So if you're an aggressive person like me, you just spend the entire rehearsal period, to the extent that the director will put up with it, beating them up. And I thought, well, I've got to stop doing this unless I go back and remember what directing was like. So I directed a play of a friend of mine at the Public with a terrifying, it was with Donna Murphy and Felicia Rashad and Marion Seldes and Dennis O'Hare. It was like, oh my God. And it was a horrible experience. And I realized, of course, it is really, really difficult to sit down with a blank page and to start and to pull something out of nothing. That's maybe, in some ways, the hardest thing of all. But actually, at least I get to say the thing that all writers, I think, must say to themselves to start writing, which is nobody ever has to see this thing. I can throw it away. I'm alone with it. No one has to know what an idiot I really am. And I can burn it. I mean, and if it doesn't work, if it really sucks, I can just, pretend that it never happened. But directors can't do that. They actually have to do everything, their entire, there's preparation beforehand, but that's essentially meaningless until you get into the rehearsal room, and then the rehearsal room, you have all these witnesses to, what an idiot you are, and it's terrifying. It's a different kind of thing, and you're also working with such terrifying economies of time and money and patience and psychology. I mean, the organization of human energy on that level. It's really, and in theater, it's in a way so much a harsher, more difficult environment than in film, where one is supported so much because of the amount of money that's at stake.